I'm here to talk about something that is actually, it's kind of made me uncomfortable. It scared me. It's given me the heebie jeebies. I feel like I'm 6 years old and I'm absolutely sure that giant weird sweater is a monster in my closet. Because something that happened right under my nose, unlike this mustache, even more horrifying. But the thing is, I don't actually know if it's horrifying. It just feels weird. It feels uncomfortable. I saw all of the headlines that Inter had been taken over by a new owner, right? And that happens all the time. Somebody buys a club from somebody else. And I'm not always paying attention to all of them. I thought it was interesting that Inter had been taken over by somebody after winning the league by what seemed like 40 points. But I didn't pay it too much mind. I figure it was just another investment firm. We were going to be introduced to some new version of Todd Bowley, and Inter was just going to keep on entering and doing what other Italian clubs do, which is inflate the value of player swap transfers and then continue to compete at a high level. I mean, shoot, they made the Champions League final like last year. But the takeover at Inter is different. It's not only a huge problem for Serie A, like in my estimation, this is a massive problem for Serie A. It is potentially a significant problem for Inter as well, and any other club that ends up in this type of situation, because according to the Financial Times, according to Reuters, I read both reports on this situation, this is a problem that is going to continue to grow. This is something that is going to happen more, not less in the future. This is a business because of the amount of money that's being spent in high-level professional sports that is expanding, not contracting. And the reason that I have all of those feelings about this takeover, where most takeovers, it's just one reprehensibly rich person taking over for another reprehensibly rich person, or a country buying a club from a reprehensibly rich person. This is a company that is lending money to those people. And if you understand the concept of lending money, right, you say, you give me this loan, right, and if I fail to repay this loan, you get this asset. Well, what if the asset is a club? Because that's what happened to Inter. I'm not misunderstanding it. I'm not making this up. Inter's owners, which were a Chinese group, let me make sure I say the name right, called Suning, that have owned the club for the last 8 years. And unlike a lot of Chinese owners, particularly in England, where they seem to be much loathed, Suning were pretty beloved owners at Inter. They've won the league multiple times. They made the Champions League final. They won the cup multiple times. They've won the Super Cup 3 times, even though I don't know how much people actually care about that. They play it in Saudi Arabia, for crying out loud. But Suning were not bad owners. Clearly, Inter Milan is thriving right now. They just had a 94-point season, and they still have a match to play. They could end up on 96 points this year. I missed by one. I was very close. But during the pandemic, Suning was short on cash and took a loan from a company called Oaktree, a California-based company that specializes in loaning high-leverage debt to companies, particularly in sports arenas, that are in need, basically. And Suning put up the club as the collateral for the loan. The loan at $275 million eventually ballooned to $400 million, and Oaktree just became the new owner of Inter because they called in the debt. Oaktree are literally debt collectors, and the debt they collected was Inter Milan. And perhaps the craziest thing to me is there's somehow no rule against this. Maybe in other leagues there is, but in Italy at least, you can put the club up as collateral for a loan. And if you are unable to repay that loan, you lose the club. I mean, obviously, that's the way that things are supposed to work when you own something and then, you're taking out a loan against it. But to have that happen with an institution as large and important as a football club is startling, if nothing else. And what does it say about Serie A that this is happening to a club that is playing as well as anybody in Serie A? I mean, they are top of the league. They went to the Champions League final last year, and they're still not making enough money to repay their debts, which means one of two things is happening. Either Suning is just really terrible at balancing the books. That is possible. We've talked about on this channel before and on the main channel about how there is a real crackdown from the Chinese government about Chinese spending outside of China, because they didn't like the idea of all that capital kind of flowing out of China. So it is much harder for these Chinese owners to get their money out of China in order to spend it, because there is there's just a real crackdown going on. So it could be possible that Suning just wasn't able to get enough money out of China, and that's the reason that this is happening. The other explanation is that clubs in Serie A don't make enough money to compete at the level that they want to compete at, right? Because the way FFP works and the way money works generally is that you need to make as much money as you are going to spend. And that is not happening, even if you are the most successful club in Italy. Because if you were in the Premier League, or you're even La Liga, and most of the time the Bundesliga, but they have the 50+1 share rule, so it's kind of a different ball game over there. If you are winning the league and making the Champions League final, you're going to make enough money to spend however much you want. If you run out of money, it is entirely your fault. But in Serie A, it feels like it's different. Because even when Inter went all the way to the Champions League final, Suning registered losses of over $80 million in just that 1 year. Specifically, it was 86 million euros in the 2022-2023 financial year. That's according to Reuters. But that's a pretty significant loss when you're having one of your most successful seasons to date. Now, they didn't win the league last year, but they did make the Champions League final. I mean, that's the biggest club event in the world, as much as Gianni Infantino is going to try and tell you it's the Club World Cup coming up soon. It's still the European Champions League. And for Inter to get all the way to that point and still register such massive losses while finishing in the top 4 in Serie A is a problem. I would be much more inclined to blame Inter's ownership for just horrific financial mismanagement and somehow finding a way to end up losing a bunch of money in a year where the club is so successful if this hadn't happened before, specifically in Serie A, with their hated rivals AC Milan, which were taken over by a U.S. hedge fund called Elliott Management in 2018. They took control of AC Milan after Chinese businessman Li Yonghong missed a payment to the club. This isn't even the first time this has happened in Serie A. AC Milan was taken over 6 years earlier for the same reason, because a Chinese owner was unable to pay their debt. So a couple of things that I'm learning here. One, if I'm a Chinese owner, I don't want to take out a loan because I'm probably not going to be able to repay it because China continues to crack down on the money. Just sell your club. You're not going to be able to save it. You just got to sell your club. The second takeaway is that this is happening in Serie A. It's not happening in the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, or maybe it's happening in Liga 1. I don't know. That's like the Wild West. Maybe I just haven't seen that yet. But in the other power leagues, we are not seeing clubs actually default on a debt that is up against the club itself. And if you're like me, the first thing you thought of is, how is a debt management company actually going to run a major football club? And that is where things get particularly startling. It actually seems like they want to. It seems like Oaktree actually wants to run the club, which is exactly what Elliott Management did for 4 years at AC Milan. They didn't sell the club until 2022, or they sold it 4 years later to Redbird Capital for 1.2 billion euros. That's 4 years of having your club managed by a debt collecting company. And Oaktree has come out and they've said in this report by Reuters that they want to be patient investors, that they're going to take their time and try and find the right opportunity. And they released like one public statement about how they understood the history of the club. Oaktree is committed to working closely with Inter Milan's current management team, partners in the league, and governing bodies to ensure the club is positioned for success on and off the pitch. And here's the whole pay. They're not planning to sell Inter immediately, and they're prepared to be a patient investor. I would assume they're going to look at what Elliott Management did and see that they got a big chunk of money once they were patient for, a couple of years. The problem is the Serie A asset's going to be a little cheaper because it clearly is hard to make money in the league, right? This is what we've been seeing for years with clubs getting caught trying to rig transfers, like those player exchanges where they value players by a lot so they can spend a lot more money. We haven't seen a lot of big money transfers coming into Serie A, but we've seen a lot leaving. That's how a lot of the big clubs have been funding what they're doing. Even a club like Inter bringing in people like Edin Dzeko on a free, right, getting those really talented players in free of charge. That has been the way that they've been able to create successful teams, right? Or Olivier Giroud, or Christian Pulisic in a bargain deal, or Ruben Loftus-Cheek in a bargain, right? Building at AC Milan, right? That's the way that the big Italian clubs are building their teams now, because financially it doesn't seem like there's any other option. And now, both Milan clubs in the last 6 years have been claimed by debt collectors and will be owned by those debt collectors, it seems, for a significant period of time. AC Milan had 4 years. We will see how long Oaktree is going to manage Inter. But what I do know is that the Inter fans loved Suning, and they're sad to see them go. In a message on Instagram, the hardcore Inter fan group Curva Nord praised Zhang for his leadership and thanked him for his contribution to the history of Inter and success achieved by the team. It's pretty rare that you see an ultra fan group publishing like a thank you to an owner when they're on their way out. I feel like that doesn't happen very often, but it happened. It happened for the Suning family, who did a good job owning the club for 8 years, but got the debt called in. And the interest, according to Reuters, was roughly 12%. Now, look, I've watched The Big Short before. 12% interest is that's how you end up in a lot of trouble real quickly. That's how a debt of $275 million turned into a debt of $400 million in like a couple years. But if I was an Inter fan, I would be worried, because Oaktree's entire reason for getting Inter back is to make its money back. Like that's how debt collectors make their money. And we're talking about a firm that manages $192 billion in assets. This corporation is one of those corporations that just has a truly silly amount of money flowing in and out of its doors. And Inter is, in, hindsight, pretty small part of that. Right? The loan they gave was $275 million. They own $192 billion in assets, or they move the money for $192 billion in assets. So Oaktree is just going to try and get its money out of Inter, no matter what public statements it's going to be releasing. We'll see if that benefits Inter as well. Can profitability and success coexist in Serie A? Honestly, I have no idea, but I'm not like raging with optimism here that this is going to be top of the bill for a company handling nearly $200 billion. But they now own Inter. It's done. It's dusted. We'll see what happens.